In this chapter, we're going to take a look at the new improvements of the terrain editor, because there are a lot of new improvements in our terrain editor and lots of new stuff we can do in it. So let's just go ahead and load in a procedural terrain and double click. This is going to open up our terrain editor, and now the first thing we notice is that actually we can expand our terrain editor to any size that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and fill it up full screen now, and we can see our full editor. And we have a lot more space to work with now while we're creating terrains, and we can actually see a much larger preview. We just have a lot more control over it. If you're using a slower system or an older system, I don't exactly recommend creating this full screen because sometimes it can overload your system if you're working with a very highly detailed terrain. Right now, we're just displaying at 256 by 256, which isn't going to really use up too many of our system resources, so that's not really a large deal. But if you're working on a sort of an older system with View, you might want to make sure that you don't make this full screen, because it can be a little jumpy and it might not exactly behave the way you want it to. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the new features that are available actually within the terrain editor. As you notice, we have a new peek command that's on the left, and we can go ahead and click peek, and it'll give us an entirely different or a new terrain that we haven't had in previous versions of View. And I can turn off zero edges since we're using a procedural terrain, and I'm also going to go ahead and scale this down. And overall, it's pretty much set up the exact same way as it was in previous versions of View, but now we have a lot more options, editing options that we can have while making our terrains. We also have some new erosion settings. So if we go to the Erode tab, we can see that we have a couple of new erosion techniques in here, and we can take a look and see exactly what those do. I'm going to go ahead and convert this to a standard terrain so that we can see a little bit more. I'm going to reset it, create a mountain. I'm also going to up our resolution just a little, reset that, recreate that mountain, so that way we can see a little bit more of the detail that's going on in here. But let's check out some of our new erosion techniques. You can see the glaciation is a very neat looking erosion technique where we can actually have it sort of cuts off halfway, and we have a lot of smoothing on the bottom and still a lot of roughness on top. We also have a couple other new ones, and it's just best to just go in there and play around with them and see exactly what they do. But we can create some very neat looking effects now, and some much cooler looking terrains than we could in the previous versions of View. We can also adjust the rock hardness of these different effects that we have. And we can still, of course, use the existing erosion techniques that we have in here. We can also use these as brushes. So if we go back to Paint and we select Effect, we can also select a lot of these new different erosion techniques that are available. So we have a lot of new different brushes and lots of new stuff to play around with. So you can go ahead and just start painting around with that stuff and check and see how your terrains look and exactly what each thing does. And I'm not going to go through each specific new erosion technique, but you can go around and just play around with them. They are there. You'll notice the new ones and just kind of see what they do. They produce some very neat looking results, and we can do it either in the global model of the terrain or, of course, paint them individually. There's also another really cool new feature we have, which is the ability to actually define our brush. I'm going to reset our terrain, and up here you'll notice that right now I actually have the brush turned on, but I'm going to click that off. And what we want to do is to enable using a brush where we can actually use an image map to define different shapes of our brushes. We can go ahead and click on this little object up here, and if we right mouse click, then it'll bring up our browser, and we can actually go through and load in different brushes. Now this is actually these are images from the brush collection from asileFX that we have. Over 250 terrain brushes. Pretty cool. We can do some neat stuff with it. So let's just go ahead and select some of these different brushes to produce different types of effects. Select this circular one, and I'm going to increase our size all the way. And now we can paint with these image maps to create some really neat looking terrains. And we can, of course, reduce our size and get some more detail in there. Use other brushes. I'll go ahead and load something else in. We have a lot of interesting looking brushes that produce very neat looking terrains. Go ahead and load this other one in, size that up, and we can see how this one affects and how that looks. So that's kind of a neat little effect we've got there. Kind of a cool brush. And you can use all these together. You can make your own brushes. And all it really has to be is a black and white image. Grayscale, as you can see from the previews. And you can create some pretty complicated looking brushes or simple brushes, or even expand upon some of the simple brushes that are already available. As you can see, there's a lot of just circles we have in here, and we can use those as well, along with some interesting looking shapes. We could do footprints. Believe we have some footprints in here. There's a couple of them. Click OK, and we have some right now giant footprints. I'm going to go ahead and reset this, and we take a look. And now these are, of course, inverted, so what we want to do is actually dig them out. And we'll reset, and I'm going to turn off our image right now, and just sort of paint it up just a tiny little bit so we can see the effects of the image. So we'll click on our image, and we want to dig now. And I'm going to size this down just a bit, and now we can make some footprints in our terrain. And of course we can adjust the softness or whatever it is we need to make the settings look better or to make the effect look better. But it's very cool now that we can use images to manipulate our terrains. And like I said, we have a collection that's available with a bunch of different terrain brushes, or you can use a lot of the brushes that come with View, because there's some that do come with it, and there'll be a lot more with the final release. Of course, I'm using the beta right now, so not everything is available. But we can get some really cool looking effects by using these different types of brushes and achieve results that we could not achieve in previous versions. So now we can just dig this stuff out right now and also raise it up and just get all different types of techniques and different brushes. And these also work on procedural terrains as well, so don't just think that they have to be done or used with standard terrains, because the new brush model will work with any type of terrain. So very cool. And another thing to note about the new terrain editor is it's now compatible with the pen tablets. So pressure tablets, so if you're using a Wacom or any other type of pen tablet, it now works with the terrain editor. So therefore we can use pressure sensitivity to achieve different results within View. So it's very, very cool new tools within the new terrain editor. And I'm just going to go ahead and close this out now, because there's one other thing too. Terrains in View 6 are much quicker in the viewports than they were in previous versions. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, delete it from the scene, and load in a procedural terrain. And after it updates now, we can zoom in and go around this terrain pretty easily, and it updates much quicker than it did in View 5. So we have much more flexible terrains when actually working in our scenes, when we're adding objects to them, and we don't really have to worry about it eating up too much of the system resources, because it does redraw much quicker within the actual scene, and we can modify these objects much easier without having a lag time waiting for them to re-update. And of course, as we zoom in, we can still get a much higher looking effect and much more detail as we zoom in. So there's some really cool new stuff going on in View 6. A lot of it's in the background. We can't really see a lot of the new features, but they're there, and they're really helping out because things are much, much faster in this version.